Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining from today. My name is Jason Brand. I am the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. So, if you've not heard of us before, Supply Chain Solutions, we are a full service logistics provider. And that really is, we're able to handle the full extent of your shipping and inventory management needs. And truthfully, we do so much, it's hard to break it down quick. So, just view that as just the start of it. We'd love to see if your organization is a good fit for our current warehouse and carrier network. So reach out to me, our team, and we can kind of run through what we're working on now, where we have space available, if we have space available, and see if you kind of fit into the mix because we would love to just check it out with you. So anyway, if you saw what we put out this week, we are talking about the ocean shipping industry. And more specifically, we're going to be diving into what has happened so far in 2024 in terms of the ocean shippers. And we're going to try to determine if we believe that this year is the right year for the recovery of the market. Obviously, post-pandemic has been pretty challenging. There's been a lot of predictions that have happened in the past. I actually was up giving a presentation last year, and I said that I didn't think 2024 would bring us back to pre-pandemic levels, but we'll see. So there are a lot of angles we need to consider when we're talking about this topic, and versus trying to touch on all of them and mention all of them, I really want to make it clear that we're going to be only focusing on really one of those variables. So you've got to remember the very basic rule of correlation and causation while we're discussing this today, because what we're going to be doing is walking through and analyzing the recent trends in cargo volumes we've been seeing across ports in the United States. So remember, this is just one single variable we're talking about. There are so many things that factor into, is this really a recovery year? But we got a lot of data, and I'd really like to break it down with you all and just kind of get your take on how you're feeling about a freight market recovery this year in 2024. So, and we are seeing a change for the better this year as far as import volumes go. And this could be a reflection of healthier economic indicators such as improved consumer demand, better global trade dynamics, and more supply chain resilience. But as you know, the market as a whole is currently going through some major disruptions. We have huge consumer debt, and there has been a trade war that's still going on, and it really only seems to be getting worse. So take today's facts at face value. That's all I really want to emphasize. But anyways, let's take a journey around what's going on in our ports. Now, we're going to work backwards from today, and we really can't start with the April numbers because they're not all finalized yet. So we're going to take a step all the way back to March. Now, let's start the journey of running through port performance with the Jacksonville Port Authority in Florida. So in the Jacksonville Port Authority in Florida, cargo volumes dipped 4% year over year in March, with loaded imports down by 2% and loaded exports down by 13%. Now, on the flip side, they did see an increase in empty containers. That actually rose by 7%, which could be a hint at shifting logistics patterns. But, in contrast to this, just staying in Florida, you've got the Port Everglades, which did report a modest increase of 1% in their total TEUs, which is supported by the arrival of these new super post-Panamax cranes, which they installed, and they've definitely been able to enhance their operational efficiency. So let's keep moving. Further west, the Northwest Seaport Alliance saw a significant 10% increase in international cargo volumes. That led by a robust 17% rise in loaded imports. So this is definitely indicating heightened level of activity, and it is likely fueled by some consumer spending or better economic conditions. But not to be outdoing the Northwest Seaport Alliance, but the Port of Houston, they celebrated their biggest March ever. They had a 20% increase in total TEUs. And, I dove into this a little bit. A few retail and shipping associations kind of talked about the Port of Houston and why this was. And they really pointed to increased consumer spending. But specifically, they talked about on durable goods. So they mentioned furniture and appliances significantly contributed to these numbers, which is great. And so with the port's loaded imports, they rose by 23% in March, just looking at that figure alone, which is very, very cool. Now, this trend of growth really does continue in most of the ports. So moving over to the Port of New York and New Jersey, where we saw there a 22% increase in March's cargo volumes, officially marking their fourth consecutive month of year-over-year growth. Similarly, the Port of Oakland enjoyed a 19% rise. And that was driven by just good economic conditions in Northern California in general. And this was also encouraging retailers to replenish their inventories. Let's shift over to the South Carolina Port Authority and the Port of Virginia. Both of them posted impressive gains, 12% at South Carolina's Port Authority and 17% at the Port of Virginia. The Port of Virginia in particular, they did benefit from a recent channel widening project. And while this did contribute to their increases a little bit, really it's more of a plan of future growth. They're trying to set themselves up to accommodate these larger vessels here. Now, let's move over and kind of consider the intermodal piece. And let's talk about Port of Savannah with this, because this was very interesting. So there was a huge surge of IPI destination changes with shippers moving to the Port of Savannah. And this happened in March. It caused them to handle nearly 436,000 total TEUs in March. And, you have to give them credit. The port has been set up very efficiently from an infrastructure standpoint. And they have consistently been posting, well, at least recently, consistently posting lower than average dwell times. And really, this is proof of the fruits of their efforts. So congratulations. Now, I think before we wrap up this picture of what's going on with port volumes, we have to kind of talk a little bit about February. So March, obviously, we talked about a couple places that had some year-over-year growth and month-over-month growth or consecutive year-over-year growth. But there's a few honorable mentions I'd like to talk about from the February numbers. And I do think it helps kind of paint a clearer picture of the ocean shipping in 2024. So let's move back over to that first port we talked about, the Jacksonville Port Authority, in which, as a reminder of the list of ports I went through, that was the sole one that showed a decrease in March. Well, if you go back to February, they witnessed a staggering 21% increase in cargo volumes year over year, with loaded imports jumping by 50%. So pretty massive. Let's move over to Port of Los Angeles. Let's talk about their February numbers. They also demonstrated a significant leap in February with a 60% increase in cargo volume. Now, this is just a quick blanket statement, kind of talking about what's happening at the ports all around the US and kind of showing what's been happening this year so far. And when I talk about that Port of Los Angeles leap in February of a 60% increase in cargo volumes, that is one I really want to single out here and say it's very critical you take that number in particular with a grain of salt, because these increases were heavily influenced by external factors. Think of things like the Red Sea disruption, think of things like the Panama Canal restrictions, and that forced cargo into LA. And likely we're also going to see more shifts that are going to be happening this year, especially with everything with the ILA heating up on the East Coast. So as we start to watch these numbers, you're going to obviously start to see East Coast numbers go down, West Coast numbers go up as people start to shift cargo in fear of strikes. But, in general, remember, right now we're talking about one single variable. Now, running through all this, there is some other topic we have to talk about, and that is year-over-year stability. And, I like bringing up those February numbers. It was really cool to see the Jacksonville Port Authority post such a huge increase in February. And obviously, it's really great news to see the same thing with the Port of Los Angeles. But it does highlight something that's concerning, and that is a lack of stability. Because if you're seeing numbers increasing by 50 or 60%, those huge swings in cargo volume, they just pose a massive risk for disruptions and challenges, especially in every process. I mean, we saw this happen in the pandemic, right? It's not only how much the port can process, it's every link in the chain afterwards, because you're going to shove that through the system and it's going to stress the weak points. It's just the way it is. So, that is a concerning thing. So when it comes to year over year stability, there was a couple ports that really stand out from the rest as being the most consistent and reliable in their operations. And I want to kind of call out the Northwest Seaport Alliance and also the Port of Houston, which both have shown very steady and very consistent growth. This year, even with the Port of Houston having their biggest March ever, they have been a popular port and they've seen consistent volume for a long time. And so, what's cool though, looking specifically at the Port of Houston, their loaded imports and empties those numbers are starting to look like pre-pandemic numbers. Obviously, all the ports saw a decline in volumes after, the it's kind of, obviously a blurry ending to it, but after the, conventional pandemic years we were dealing with. But what we're seeing now is these increases are actually getting to the point where they're looking like pre-pandemic numbers, and they're not swinging as aggressively, increase, decrease, that kind of stuff month over month. So one thing I want to talk about, you know, the bottom line here is it's very clear this is a healthy increase we're seeing in imports across the US, whether you focus on the East Coast or you focus on the West Coast. But just make sure you don't jump to the conclusion that we're in a freight recovery at this moment. There's no doubt this is a healthy sign, and there's no doubt this is a important component of a freight market recovery. But remember, we're talking about a single variable here. Couple things you've got to consider. So something called inventory overhang. We mentioned this last week, but the National Retail Association, they mentioned it earlier this month, that a healthy portion of the imports that went into California and boosted their numbers really was to do with companies holding off restocking for so long. They just kind of finally were forced to do so. And another big thing we want to consider is earlier in a show previously, actually, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about JB Hunt's first quarter earnings call. And when we were going through that call, it was a very, very interesting breakdown because they showed, they were seeing a ton more volume coming into California. But if you looked at their network in general, that boost in volume wasn't making up for the decrease in volume they were seeing mainly on the East Coast, but more or less everywhere else. And in general, they were not in a great standing. So the point I'm really trying to emphasize here is that while these figures are a needed and important step, we aren't back in that pre-pandemic market just yet, but little spritz of optimism. There's no doubt we're heading in the right direction, which is really, really fantastic. So everyone, big thanks for watching. This is a quick run through of what we've been seeing with port volumes so far this year, and the trends they're going through. And I am really, really, really excited seeing these numbers at hearing the second quarterly earnings calls, because that's going to tell me, for example, looking at JB Hunt, what's happening with their whole network. Has it improved drastically since their first quarter earnings call? And, really excited to share that with you all. Thank you so much. Make it a great day. Make it a great week. And we'll talk to you next week. Thanks. Bye.